I often think it would be fantastic to have a time machine and just go back in time with all these articles and all these stuff about what these Brexiteers did post referendum and just go, hey, I'm a time traveler. Here's the proof. Oh, and by the way, guys, this is how Brexit's going. It's not going well. Of course, I'm sure I'll be greeted with, that man is just part of Project Fear. He might be a time traveler, but he's a liar of a time traveler. Brexit works. He's just a biased time traveler. I'm sure I would have been greeted with such delightful phrases and everything. We could have probably even taken some of these Brexiteers from 2016 to meet their, shall we say, 2022 counterparts. Might be quite interesting to say the least, but who knows? But there is certainly one thing that was big in 2016, and that was, of course, talk about the Common Agricultural Policy. And if you don't know what that is essentially a subsidy that Margaret Thatcher negotiated from the EU, because a lot of European countries, except ours for some reason, subsidize farmers. Margaret Thatcher said that wasn't fair, given sort of, again, sort of the nature of sort of the single market having to accept sort of all these rules. They said, look, we won't subsidize our farmers, but we want a rebate. And of course, there are other rules going in there as well, and around sort of the regulations. It was a whole big thing. But losing that has meant a big consequence for farmers and their access to the European market. It has been massive and a massive change for them. And it has not been going well for them. The trade deals have put many of the UK farmers practically into a 15-year almost dead end, because as soon as those 15 years are up, well, in come the cheap imports from Australia and New Zealand, and oh boy, that's going to wipe out a whole load of British farmers. As we've said before, you look at the size of even the biggest farm in the UK and compare it to like the biggest farm in Australia, and the Australian one is like 5 to 6 times larger. In fact, it might even be bigger than that from what I remember. I think it might be ridiculous size. Like it's like 10 times the size. The farms in Australia are pretty big. And then, of course, they don't follow the same rules and regulations, which basically means they can do a whole lot of stuff far, far cheaper than our UK farmers can. And of course, that is because we in the UK enjoy our high food standards. And of course, that is what many people in the UK really want to see and sort of keep. And we are going to see this whole battle certainly play out. But there is a light at the end of all this, and that is that back in 2016, certainly in the post-glow of the referendum, many farmers were really split. They were basically very 50-50 split on the EU. And now we are starting to see farmers more and more drift to saying, look, Brexit was wrong. It was a dumb idea. It is hurting our industry. And you know what? I may not have liked the Common Agricultural Policy, but I'll tell you what, it was a damn sight better than what's being given to replace it. So we're going to go into this because I think this is absolutely fascinating, and it's certainly good insight into what farmers are saying about Brexit and, of course, losing the Common Agricultural Policy. So in and away we go. So, as always, guys, before we begin, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button if you are new to the channel. And, of course, do remember to ring that bell, because then you'll get notifications of when we sort of go live or when we post a new video. There are also links down below to my Patreon page, more notification link called Buy Me Coffee, the YouTube thank you button as well down below, and, of course, the Pony Club as well. And if you do join the Patreon page on the Pony Club, remember, we do a weekly video for all those members. So, like I say, remember that is there if you join those things. So, as always, guys, let's crack on with this then, shall we? Because this is going to be yet another long video. I'm sorry that I've been making such long videos, but to be honest, I think some of them have been really fascinating recently. So this comes from The Guardian with the title of, "We're Only Seeing the Negative. The UK farmers on Brexit and losing the Common Agricultural Policy." Sitting in his 18th century farmhouse in the uplands of Betham, in its breathtaking western reaches of the Brecon Beacons, Ian Rickman ponders the damage of Brexit has done to his future. 2 years since the UK quit the EU, the future for mountaintop sheep farmers such as him is economically precarious. He has lost unfettered access to his nearest export market. What a shock, which is what we were saying would happen all along. And his reduction in farm subsidies as a result of the loss of the Common Agricultural Policy, or the CAP. And that has been a disadvantage by these new trade deals, giving the UK market access to rival farmers from Australia and New Zealand. He said, from the sheep farmers' point of view, there is no good outcome from those trade deals. Their predominantly international markets are China and the Far East. Why give them access to the UK? At the moment, we are fine. But if for some reason there were, God forbid, a Ukrainian type situation in the Far East and sanctions imposed overnight, they will use the huge access to our market, he says. It is a subject that jangles the nerves of farmers across Wales who see Brexit all as a downside. A great deal is something more beneficial to agriculture. Now, at the moment, we haven't. We're only seeing the negative, says Rickman. There is no way you can dress those trade deals up as a good thing. I've heard farmers say the industry was more or less chucked under a bus. And by the way, we haven't said a lot this year about fishing, but that's because, as we said, nothing has really changed for the fishermen. They're still in the exact same state we left them in last time we did a video. They're still suffering. And now you've got farmers feeling we were chucked under a bus. I'll tell you this, if we in the Rejoin campaign, if we can get fishermen and farmers on our side to saying rejoining sort of the single market or even the EU is a good thing, I'm sorry, but that would be a amazing coup. That would be an absolutely amazing coup of epic magnitudes if we could achieve that. So, Aguto Beb, the managing director of the Farmers Union for Wales, says his counterparts in Australia are very pleased with the contingency they now have if the Chinese markets were to be closed off. But where's our insurance policy after losing the single market? We don't have one, he says. A study by the statutory levity body and the Agricultural Horticultural Development Board has concluded that the New Zealand exports to the UK would rise by 13,000 tonnes. That's 31% if China imposed a 25% tariff on the New Zealand lamb imports. And, of course, 29,000 tonnes, that's 69%, if there was an outright ban. Energy prices for everyone are going through the roof. And while some of the same time, the cost is selling to the EU, which represents about 33% of lamb export market, has also spiraled. A cross-industry veterinarian and health group, the Sanitary and Phytosanitary Certification Working Group, estimated that the new requirement for health export certification signed off by the vets would add over £16 million to the cost of food exports to Europe in just 2021. Where previously that was nothing. So it's now costing farmers more to send their food to Europe. I don't know how many times we've explained that now we having to pay that is making UK farmers, UK businesses less competitive. They are now less agile. And not only this, we are also seeing exports from the rest of the world to the UK drop off as well, because again, we no longer have access to the single market. The numbers don't lie, unfortunately. So it hasn't been doomsday, but it is a question of more problems being added to trade, says Webb. Brexit barriers are so unnecessary and for so little gain. Mountain sheep farming is a tough business, with many hill farmers unable to survive without subsidies, threatening not just their livelihoods, but the presence of a farmer as a pastoral keeper of the land, which in Rickman's case is part of one of Wales' national parks. Before returning to the subject of Brexit, Rickman talks of the importance of sheep grazing in the uplands to keep grass down to minimizing the risk of climate change wildfires and also tinder dries debris building up. Sitting in his kitchen, Rickman explains how the farming sector has been cushioned from the worst of Brexit as inflation has driven up the price of red meat. Figures for 2020 and 2021 show the income from cattle and sheep farming in, quote, less favourable areas, up to at least 32%, up to £29,000. In other years, it would have been dangerously low. In 2017, the president of the Farmers Union had dipped into the £13,000, less than half of the national average wage. Brexit, the government said, was about giving farmers, quote, for the first time in 50 years, the chance to do things differently. George Eustace, the then environmental secretary, asserted that in 2020 that it makes no sense to subsidise land ownership and tenure where the largest subsidy payments too often go to the wealthiest landowners. Among the beneficiaries of the cap direct payments that were made per hectare were, of course, the Brexiteer James Dyson, who received more than £5 million from the EU, and, of course, the former Daily Mail editor Paul Darcy, who pocketed £88 million from his Scottish Liberal estate in 1 year alone. But the National Farmers Union and the FTW fear for the small farmers who are dependent on CAP. And MPs on the Welsh Affairs Committee have expressed concern in 2022 that around a fifth of Welsh farmers had a farm business income of less than zero. With an average income of about £26,000 per farm, government research has shown that the subsidy is the difference between profit and loss for 42% of farms in the UK. And we'd said this back in 2016, and since then, CAP, or the Common Agricultural Policy, was massively important for many farmers, and even more importantly, the small farmers. And here's the thing: as you said, you've seen all that big money going to people like Paul Darcy and James Dyson. You could have very easily gone, well, if they're already having sort of big massive incomes, just don't give it to them. We could have means tested it very, very easily. That way the small farmers could have gotten more. But of course, remember, we're a Conservative government. They weren't exactly going to go against people like Paul Darcy or even, again, Joe Dyson. So back to it. So launched back in 1962 as a partnership between the agricultural and society, the CAP was envisioned as an income support scheme after research showed that farmers' income was 40% lower than non-agricultural incomes. I don't get government support, the EU subsidy, and then squirrel it away in my Swiss bank account or go off to Barbados. That doesn't happen. That money goes straight into local businesses, says Rickman, referring to the vet, the mechanic, the feed supplier, the fence contractor. Farming is the backbone of the rural economy. Agricultural is devoid of competency, and as Wales is still designing the replacement for the CAP, farmers such as Rickman are getting direct payments. But Wales has accused Westminster of a political sleight of hand when carving up the amounts for the four nations out of the UK. The Farmers Union has calculated that Wales will be £225 million down after the life of the current Parliament on the basis that it has not used up all the EU funding. It's political games. We've taken the view that Westminster government is guilty of breaching a manifesto promise that would match the spending pound for pound, said Beebe. Just because some of the money has not been spent does not mean that it has been allocated to a project. We've had a bypass near me open recently that was funded by the EU in 2020. You are allowed overhangs if projects take time to get up and running, he complained, he adds. In Scotland, there is the similar gripe. The country reckons it will lose out on approximately £93 million between 2021 and 2025. The Department for Rural and Economic Affairs, or DEFRA, said that the 2019 manifesto commitment maintains the annual farming budget of at least 2.4 billion until 24 to 25, with all the reductions from farmers and direct payments being reinvested back into the sector. They added that CAP, quote, did nothing to improve food production or food security and give half the budget to the largest 10% of the landowners. Well, why not change it so that it doesn't? You know, if that's the common complaint, why not change it so that it doesn't go to the largest 10% of the landowners? It's not rocket science, guys, but there you go. The better replacement scheme would be the, quote, support the choices and incentivize better farming, this says. In England, the phasing out of the cap is well underway with a new environmental land management scheme, although that's having its own problems, as we've talked about before. That will prioritise better placements in farming and environmental protection with financial incentives for moves such as reduction in fertiliser usage or the maintenance of moorlands. The DEFRA figures show that phasing out of CAP is already affecting farm incomes, even though the replacement scheme is still sketchy. The progressive phasing out of CAP has left farmers at least 20% down this year, and they will be short by 50% of the previous EU subsidy in 2024. Farmers in England are now receiving less support, quite significantly less. So that impact comes, says Nick von Volskot, the Director of Trade and Business and Strategy at the National Farmers Union. Most farmers still don't know what it is they will be signed up to in the future years, or what they'll have to do to meet the requirements of any new scheme, he adds. Under the plan, in England, the direct payments will be phased out completely by 2028. In its place, under the ELMs, the Countryside Stewardship Scheme and the Sustainable Farming Initiative scheme as well. DEFRA says about 32,000 farmers have already been signed up to the Countryside Stewardship Scheme, up to 90% since Brexit signed off in 2022. The SFI scheme is still being piloted, with new details to be announced in January. Farmers have expressed concern that the administration and the resources need to participate in the scheme. It reduces its attractiveness, saying, if the payments don't make business sense, you will find farmers who will not sign up to the scheme, Von says. For the NUF, which was very vocal about the need to maintain trade and animal welfare standards, Brexit is still causing uncertainty for farming businesses 6 years after the referendum. Brexit was always going to lead to the considerable change for farming businesses in the UK, with the end of free movement of labour and the cap and the restructuring of our trade relationship with the EU and the rest of the world. But more than 6 years on from the referendum, and there is still a massive uncertainty about what it is that change actually looks like, said Von Salt. And when the trade deals with the big agricultural exports, such as Australia and New Zealand, have been struck, this increased competition in the domestic market and the associated plans for increasing our exports and even in trying to improve competitiveness appear to be still in the development phase, he says. While at the same time, trade in agricultural products with our nearest neighbour in Europe has reduced dramatically. None of this is inevitable, but it does need political will to compromise and have long-term planning results, says von Westenhorst. Regarding his claims that British farming was being put at risk by the trade deals, the DEFRA spokesperson said, the interest of our farmers and food producers is a priority of our trade policy, and our trade deals are delivering on this. Well, clearly not. Our negotiations will continue to support farmers. Again, they clearly are not, given, of course, the Australian and the New Zealand deal. And you had George Eustace, the former head of DEFRA, saying that Australia deal was a bad deal. In December, the Environmental Secretary, Theresa Coffey, promised that the next batch of SIF payments will be unveiled in the new year, and this would be easier and more beneficial to farmers. She pledged to have a, quote, full range of replacement supports in place by 2024, which would work out whether, quote, you are a commoner, an upland farmer, or a small family farm. I don't think that's going to go well. I think this is a walking disaster. I really think they do. I do not think the Tories have any idea when it comes to creating a farming policy. And certainly these trade deals that we've done do not support. They do not support in any way, shape, or form. And it's funny that he says, oh, yes, negotiations are ongoing. The Australian trade deal's already been done. You've signed it. You cannot go back to renegotiate. And one of the things I've said many, many times, that when we see probably the big public backlash that is going to come against some of these trade deals, and I think there is going to be a big public backlash sooner or later. If the Brexiteers, who I think there are going to be a lot of people upset about those trade deals, probably going to be the ones who are certainly going to either say, well, I have to either support this backlash, or because if I don't, I'm going to be the one taking this damage, then they are going to be kind of shocked. Because, to be honest, leaving the EU and through all the stuff, all the negotiations that we have done, is going to look complete and utter child's play to try and getting out of a signed trade deal that we have done with Australia and New Zealand. Because I'll tell you what will probably happen. We'll probably be taken to the WTO. Australia can probably put tariffs on us to punish us for breaking that deal, and etc., etc. It's not going to be good for our economy. And one of the things that he points out very clearly, the markets for Australia and New Zealand isn't the UK, it's the Asia Pacific region. That's their market. Why? Because they're the closest trading partners. Our closest trading partner is Europe. So this whole Brexit nonsense makes no sense. Not one bit of business sense. I've said that before. If you look at Brexit from a purely business lens, like a sense, Brexit doesn't make any sense. You're putting up unnecessary trade barriers for, as was even said there in the piece we just went through, for little to no gain. And even now, the farmers going, well, there's no Brexit upsides. And I wonder if the farmers should start taking a leaf from the French farmers' playbook and look at how the French farmers protest. Because they have massive long convoys of tractors clogging up Paris, or like major motorways as they, tractor towards Paris, like their big protest. I think eventually we'll see a big farmer protest. I think it will get a lot of support. I really do. I cannot see farmers not getting that support. And the other interesting thing, as we've said as well, is we have seen farmers change their political allegiance. Many of them are abandoning the Conservative Party over things like this that they are doing, getting rid of CAP, replacing it with the ELMs, and basically almost ensuring that many of these farmers are pretty much going to go out of business. As you saw in some of those numbers, without those CAP payments, without those subsidies, many of them are in a situation where they're earning well below the national minimum wage. How can that farm survive? The simple answer, it can't. Just simple. It just straight up can't. And I think when that starts to hit, that's when we'll start to see, I think, big protests. Will we get one next year? Will we get one maybe the year after? I don't know. But I can sort of predict, in my crystal ball, sooner or later, if things do not change to really help the farmers, I think they will have some big protest. And I tell you what, I think it will get a lot of public support. And their main point of contention is Brexit. All this has happened to them because of Brexit. And this is where the pro EU movements need to be moving in, need to be talking with people like the National Farmers Union, getting like organizations started in and around farmers saying, hey, look, you need to start speaking out. Brexit is your pain point. This is what's caused all this. Start to tell them, look, you were better off when we were in the EU. And then when it comes to that big moment where we are sort of rejoining the European Union, guess what? We've got farmers on our side and potentially even the fishermen on our side as well. What would the well, I suppose it would be the Remain campaign at that point have on their side? Take all their allies, turn their once friends into now their most hated enemies. That is a fantastic tactic, I think, that we can certainly bears looking into, shall we say. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and our affiliate link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, we'll see you all next time.